Hello, and welcome to Games is Lit 101. Once again, it's time for literary analysis, though not quite in the usual way. We're going to talk about art games. Defining the term art game is a bit difficult, so instead, we're just going to set forth some parameters. Firstly, video games are art. When we talk about an art game, we're not talking about a video game that is art. We're talking about a specific genre of video games. Art games are no more or less art than any other video game, they just approach the medium a bit differently. It would be worth looking to the art film as an example of what we're talking about here. That terminology also defies absolute definition, but there are still some generally agreed upon characteristics of the genre. It's not made for mass appeal, it's highly symbolic and thoughtful, maybe a bit unconventional, and rather serious in its intent and themes. They're usually independent, sometimes not made for profit at all, though that's not a universal rule. Similar rules apply to art games. They're rarely made by large studios, and those rare exceptions still got their start somewhere in the indie landscape. They're not necessarily made to appeal to the majority of gamers, because their slow pace and thoughtful, symbolic design won't necessarily get through to the majority of people. And they are usually trying to communicate something serious, often by way of some relatively unconventional game design. So, in short, the art genre of any medium seems mostly to focus on thoughtful pieces that eschew traditionally enjoyable design for the purpose of creating something serious that will move people and get them thinking. And to get this out of the way, we are not going to be talking about whether or not art games can be called games in the first place. That's a topic for an entire other episode, but I will say this, that discussion has no place in today's episode. We're talking about interactive artworks that use the medium of video games to accomplish unique artistic goals. Whether or not they can technically be called games is, frankly, entirely irrelevant, as it has absolutely no bearing on their artistic merit or their interactive value. So then, these games tend to utilize their mechanics as the major method of communicating their ideas. And they also tend to simplify one or more major elements of traditional game design for the purpose of getting a strong, simple message across through the experience. So, today we're going to be taking a look at a few art games and using them to figure out what's up with the genre, as well as giving them each a bit of literary analysis. First up, let's take a look at Loneliness by Jordan Magnuson. It's a free game, and you can just play it in your browser, and it only takes a couple minutes to play, so the link is actually down in the description. I do recommend that you just pause the video, go check it out real quick before we talk about it, because it's not the same to have it described to you as it is to actually play it yourself, so I'll wait. Alright, let's go. As with any game, mechanics do of course exist here. Movement is a mechanic. The way the other dots move away is a mechanic. The game is very simple, but it's still comprised of the basic building blocks of game design. But the major thing it's lacking is a stated goal, as well as challenges to keep you from it. It never tells you to go for the dots, or avoid them, or attack them, or anything. It just lets you make your own ideas about what to do, and none of those different approaches are going to result in victory or loss. And that's the key to its meaning. Since the game doesn't tell you what to do, you decide what to do yourself. And the cool thing is, it differs for everyone who plays. I know people who thought the dots were enemies and tried to avoid them. Others thought they should be collecting them and went toward them. Others saw them as friends, other people, and tried until the end to approach them in hopes some would stick around. Others approached the first few groups, then gave up and decided to just leave them alone. The game is made to invoke a feeling of, well, loneliness. The other dots will always leave as soon as you get close. There's nothing that you can do to actually change that. But the way that you act while playing the game can actually lead to some rather useful insights into yourself. Did you approach the dots and then start avoiding them when it became clear they wouldn't accept you? If so, did you do that because you didn't want to bother with them, or because you felt you would only ruin their fun? Did you approach them the whole time, even up to that last dot? Did you do that because you desperately hoped one would accept you, or perhaps because you just wanted to get them all away? Or even avoided them all from the beginning, afraid of what might happen if you made contact? These are only a few of the many, vastly different approaches that you can take to the scenario the game sets forth. We all do something different, and our actions, as well as the motivations behind those actions, say something about us. About how we handle other people, and how we handle being away from them. And all this is accomplished largely because the game uses such minimal mechanics, forsaking goals and challenges in favor of letting us dictate our own behavior. So even while mechanics obviously still exist in this game, it minimizes them until they're barely noticeable, an invisible framework for an enlightening experience. By choosing to do away with traditional game structure, the simplicity of these mechanics manages to deliver a simple and powerful message through those mechanics alone. But of course, not all art games accomplish their goals by simplifying the mechanics so dramatically. Some, instead, would rather utilize traditional game design instead of simplifying and obscuring it. Enter Loved by Alexander Osius. There are a lot of art games that play like pretty normal games, but this one's probably one of the better out there. At its core, it's a pretty simple little platformer where you need to dodge obstacles in order to get to the end, but it features a rather unsettling narrative hook. It's also free and short. Link is in the description, and as before, I recommend you go play it real quick before continuing with this video. Analysis in 3, 2, 1... Right from the get-go, you're asked your gender, only to have your answer ignored. You're told you are something else, denied your ability to define your own person. Continuing on, you see that this voice often tells you to do something dangerous or harmful. At one point it tells you to go through a dangerous tunnel rather than a nice easy stroll above ground. If you disobey, the voice chastises you, and the world starts shifting, gradually replacing the environment with spots of color. At a later point, the voice tells you to jump onto spikes. Refusal to do so only makes the screen even more colorful, but less defined. Continuing to defy this voice will make things more and more difficult to see as colors start to overtake the environment, and it'll become difficult to play the game. The reason this is so unsettling is that it clearly mirrors an abusive relationship. The voice wants control over you, for seemingly no reason other than to have you under its thumb. It gives you arbitrary, often harmful commands, and praises you when you follow them, but punishes and berates you if you don't. Loved is actually utilizing fairly traditional game mechanics to communicate its message. The primary element of the game is the way the gameplay changes based on your reactions to this voice. At its heart, the game is a platformer that becomes more easy or more difficult with your choices, but it goes a bit deeper than that. You control the difficulty by choosing whether you should retain your pride or give in for the sake of an easier time. The blurriness of the visuals when you disobey is a metaphor for how much more difficult life is if you try to stand up to an oppressor, whereas complying with them, even to your own detriment, keeps things easy. The game uses the concept of challenge and your ability to alter that challenge based on your decisions to communicate its point, and does so pretty powerfully. There are also a lot of interesting little symbolic touches too. Like how if you obey the voice, the world becomes more detailed and easier to navigate, but also dark, drab, and kind of unsettling. If you disobey, it gets far more colorful, representing the hope and agency you feel when making your own decisions, but it also gets more difficult to navigate the myriad dangers. The green checkpoints are revealed to be statues, which seem to be fairly typical human body types in comparison to the large, undefined mass you're playing as. When you die, you shatter into pieces, and those pieces stick around, constantly reminding you of your failures. Even when you're sent back to a checkpoint, you're thrown back harshly. Then, at the end of the game, if you obeyed the voice, you receive praise and affirmation before seeing a coin, a traditional symbol of reward in these types of games, and as you grab it, the game ends, abruptly. If you disobeyed, the voice asks why you hate it. After all, it loved you. The game has a lot of symbolism, both aesthetically and mechanically, and it all helps build this uncomfortable and powerful atmosphere of oppression. But the interesting thing is that Loved exists in a medium where we're used to having our choices matter. In video games, we're rewarded for our skillful and intelligent play, and we don't much like it when a game deprives us of that. That's a rather poignant climate in which to introduce a game that exists specifically to manipulate us by depriving us of that freedom. Suddenly, asserting our free will only makes things more difficult and earns us negative feedback from the game. Things we usually glorify in video games instead affect us negatively, and the only way to make it better is to comply with the orders of this voice, even when it causes more pain and difficulty. So alright, Loneliness took out a few important elements of traditional game design so it could speak more strongly through the few it retained, inspiring a feeling of loneliness and giving us an opportunity to look into ourselves based on our actions. Loved, on the other hand, took a far more typical game structure, but then subverted it, making us feel resentment and oppression. So then, what about a game that just lets us explore a concept? Here's where our third game comes in. This one's called The Majesty of Colors by Gregory Weir. Again, short game, free game, pause the video and play it now if you don't want spoilers, the link's down below. Alright then. Majesty of Colors, like Loneliness, only has mechanics in the vaguest sense of the word. The narration before and after the game seems to be from the perspective of a dreaming person, but in the game itself you play a giant tentacled creature under the ocean near the shore. The game starts in black and white, but as you grab a balloon and inspect it, it springs into color. The rest of the game after that is a series of choices driven by a single trait: curiosity. When a human is jet skiing, you wonder what it is, and you must hold it close as you did the balloon. But when you do, you're holding it underwater, it starts drowning. You decide whether to put it back on the jet ski or keep looking at it until it drowns. A series of similar events follows, and the first few choices set the stage for how the humans will react to you. If you choose to do right by the humans, they'll accept you, but if you harm them, they'll lash out and attack you. Well, it kind of seems like a simple, branching story. Each branch of the story still contributes to one particular theme: curiosity. Its wonders, as well as its dangers. Most video games tend to offer player choice as a binary decision between good or evil options, but this game's actually coming at it from a bit of a different perspective. From the beginning, the choices you're given pertain directly to how you'll react to something that you don't understand. The first actual choice of this game isn't a choice of whether you will kill or save someone. It's a choice of whether satiating your curiosity is worth the life of the object of your wonder. If you killed a human, it's not because you have anything against it or want to be evil, it's because you didn't understand it and prioritized your own discovery over its well-being. The result is negative, of course, but it was a choice made out of ignorance and negligence, not ill will. After that, things get a bit more black and white. You could help the humans or you could hurt them. You can also be destroyed by them. Either way though, it all started with that curiosity, whether you decided to learn about them or help them, which was more important in your mind. Following your curiosity too far led to destruction of either you or the humans, whereas learning when to stop and let things be led to a friendship between you and them. I think it's safe to say that the basic theme of this game is curiosity, but beyond that, there could actually be a number of more specific interpretations. It could be a cautionary tale about scientific ethics, or childlike wonder, or even some sort of reverse Lovecraftian story of some kind. It could be any number of things. The cool thing about this is that its premise is solid enough that we know what it's about, but the experience is simple enough, not to mention up to our own actions, that it's still a bit up to interpretation as to exactly what it's capable of meaning. The ability to leave something open to interpretation is most often accomplished in art by a relatively simple presentation, carefully put together so every element of it means one thing or another. This is something art games excel at, since they're simple by their very nature and not tied to traditional concepts of game design. Now there's one more game I want to talk about today, and it's a classic. It was one of the first art games to get a lot of attention, and to this day it remains one of the more interesting and impactful examples of the genre. Let's talk about Passage by Jason Rohrer. You know the drill at this point. It's free, it's short, link is in the description, though this one's downloadable rather than playable in your browser. You can get it on Mac, PC, Linux, or for 99 cents in the iOS App Store. I do highly recommend that you play through this one. Just pause the video, grab it really quick, and play it before finishing the rest of this. This one especially, you do not want to spoil by just listening to me explain it before you play it. Passage puts you in control of a very pixelated boy, and you start walking right. That's the only place to go, really, so you keep with it. You can also go down, though, and you discover there's a maze here. There are occasional treasure chests, which give you points for finding and opening them. As you continue, you soon can pick up a companion, a woman who begins to follow you. Mostly due to its music, the game up until now felt kind of sad and lonely, and you welcome the company. You continue walking, but you may notice that it's even harder to navigate the maze with her following you around. You can still progress to the right with her, but you'll come across a good few treasure chests that you just can't get in to collect. The observant player will notice that at the beginning, the player starts off on the far left of the screen, and the further to the right you look, the more blurry everything is. You can't really see what's ahead of you. As you continue, you and the woman both age. The observant player may notice something else now. You've gradually moved from the left side of the screen closer to the right, and while the future was blurry at first, the past is blurry now. eventually your companion becomes a gravestone. Alone, you continue on, slowly advancing toward the far right of the screen until eventually you also turn into a tombstone. Passage only uses mechanics in the barest of forms. Like Loneliness, it uses concepts of structured play, but not enough to make it a traditionally defined game. And like Loved, it subverts some classic mechanical concepts by including them, but twisting their meaning a bit. You may have noticed that the points don't mean anything. There's no high score, no leaderboards. You get the points by finding the chests and moving forward, but they don't actually affect anything in the long run. Because in the end, you're going to end up the same way, and what you've accumulated along the way won't matter after that. The points are satisfying to get, but ultimately frivolous. But that's far from the only meaningful thing in this game. In fact, it astounds me how many little symbolic things are packed into this game. So let's go a bit deeper into what they all are and what they mean. Starting off on the left side signifies the beginning of life. The very map of the game becomes something of a timeline, where you start at the beginning and meet your end, well, at the end. But to make it an even better analogy, as you start, you can't really see what's ahead of you. It's blurry, and you can't really make anything out. But as you get older, the opposite is true. You know exactly what's ahead, even if there's not much left, and it gets harder to see what's behind you, where you've already been. Going with the idea of the game screen as a timeline, this is a pretty awesome symbol. It shows how uncertain the future is when you're young, but also how true the opposite is when you're old. You can see clearly ahead of you because there's not much to see. You know where you're going, and you know that your journey is nearing its end. But now, as you grow old, there's so much life behind you, and maybe even mental issues that come with old age, that the past becomes unclear. It's also worth noting the game's strange window size. It's really long, and you can't really see much above or below. Again, seeing it as a timeline, this has symbolic significance. Moving forward on a single path allows you to have a general idea of what you're heading toward, but changing that path keeps the future relatively uncertain and kind of aimless. When the woman enters the picture, it's something of a relief. The game is pretty atmospheric, and it just feels lonely before she comes in. But she also restricts your movement, making it harder to pursue the points. The joy of frivolity is harder to attain, even though you're enjoying the company of this other person. Alright, I'm not even making a ball and chain joke, alright? That would undermine the brilliance at play here. This is clearly representative of marriage, or some other kind of similar commitment. And to partner yourself with someone like this requires that you give of yourself, in addition to gaining the benefits. You can't necessarily pursue all the same stuff. You can't live the same carefree lifestyle you may have been able to when you were single. It's a give and take, one that's clearly represented in this simple mechanic. As you continue, of course, she eventually dies. Her life has ended, and thus, so has your journey together. You're left to continue on alone. And you can now pursue the chests as you did before, but the game once again just feels achingly lonely, and you continue on until the end. Like with Loneliness, your feelings toward the events of the game are going to mean a lot about what you get out of it. You could resent your companion, or you could love her. You could even just avoid her entirely. You could spend the final moments of the game just enjoying the experience, or you could spend them in sadness at your impending demise. You could even spend the entire time just moving straight forward, trying to get as far as you can, or you could spend it all searching for treasure. Your feelings toward these things affect what the game means to you, but they don't particularly affect what the game is trying to accomplish in the first place. This is a reflection on life. The goal is to make you come face to face with the transient nature of your existence, and regardless of your feelings toward specific elements of the game, that's accomplished pretty effectively. Now, you may have enjoyed those games, or just thought they were stupid, but either way, I do hope it's clear at this point that art games do have a place in this medium. I mean, sure, we could still argue their status as games, but that's really not the point. They utilize interactivity in the same artistic ways as more traditional games do, and while they are far more simple in their content and presentation, they have a lot of interesting, unique, and creative uses of interactivity that most normal games just aren't really in a position to try. So I hope you enjoyed this look into some of the great examples of this genre, and I hope you learned something about how art games work in the process. It certainly is a unique genre, and rather interesting if you look into how these games utilize game design to make a point, rather than creating a challenge. Next week, since Christmas is coming up, we're going to talk about Christmas games. And next literary analysis, we're going to take on a game that I think we can all agree was a triumph. I'm just making a note here, huge success. It's hard to overstate my satisfaction, really. Class dismissed.
Snickerdoodles suck.
Boo. I mean, yay. Boo on what you said, not on Snickerdoodle, just whatever. Okay.